Here's my overview for Elements, a full voice of modal synthesis from Mutable instruments. I'll go through the features first and then move on to showing some of the CV response and using the external inputs. Be sure to check out the other Mutable instruments videos on my page as well after watching this video. Elements is split into two distinct sections which create the modal synthesis. There's the exciter on the left and the resonator on the right of the module. Unlike subtractive synthesis where the sound generation is pitched and then filtered and shaped, the sound source here is the exciter. The exciter creates impulses and noise, and then the resonator creates the harmonics and the tonal qualities based on various vibrating objects. There are three elements to the exciter section, which are bow, blow and strike. I'll start with the bow and work across the module. I've got a gate input, but you can also just hit the play button as well, which is what I'll do to go through the features. The tone of this is determined by the resonator section, so I'll be moving back and forth between the two. Both the bow and the blow react to the envelope shape set by the contour knob, which moves through AD to ADSR then to AR shapes. There's just a timbre to edit for the bow section, and the bow section creates a scratchy bowing noise, and the timbre controls the granularity of that bowed material. Turning down the timbre softens the sound and creates a much smoother excite signal going into the resonator. Changing some resonator settings, we can get wildly varied sounds with the same exciter input. Moving on to blow, this looks at airflow, and the flow knob controls various colours of noise, which is set out like wavetable scanning. This again is affected by the envelope contour. Opening up the timbre, we can get a much harsher noise coming through. And although this does get harsher, it's completely controlled by the resonator settings with the dampening, brightness and geometry controls. So here's changing some of that resonator. Turning down the blow, here's the strike section, and the envelope contour doesn't affect the strike. The timbre of the strike affects both the brightness and the speed of the percussive excitation. Here's some different resonator section sounds. Here's the mallet type, which moves through samples of hammers and mallets and strikes, along with physical models of those strikes that have got dampening or not, and also plectrums picked at different picking speeds, and models of particles bouncing on a surface. So that about sums up the exciter section. Moving on to the resonator, we've got coarse tune, which is quantized in semitone steps. then got the fine tune, which isn't quantized in any way. There's an attenuverter for the FM input. There's geometry control, which is the most essential parameter, which is controlling the stiffness of the resonating structure and the structure itself from plates, strings, bars and tubes through to bells and bowls. The brightness controls how muted the high frequencies are. Lower values will mimic more wood and nylon-like tones, and higher values simulate glass or steel. Dampening then controls how quickly the energy dissipates through the material. Modulating this can have the same effect as playing and then muting a guitar string, or striking a drum and then placing your hand on the drum skin to mute the vibrations. The position controls at which point that string or surface is excited. You can think of this like which point of a guitar string you pluck or which part of a drum skin you actually hit. And this works out to sound like pulse width modulation. And with CV you can get comb filtering and phaser-like sounds. Space controls both the stereo width and the amount of reverb. At its minimum position, it sends the exciter and the resonator outputs to the left and right outputs independently, and as you move through the space settings, it starts to mix these and create the stereo space. The stereo width is controlled by two virtual microphones on the vibrating surface of the resonator, and this simulates and changes the angle between the microphones. Beyond 12 o'clock, the space then controls the decay time, and at full level triggers a freeze effect on the reverb, meaning that you can layer up notes and create a frozen chord sound. So you can hear that stereo width change and the decay of the reverb increase. So that's it for the features. There's also CV attenuators for pretty much everything, a strength input which could be thought of as a velocity control, and external inputs as well. So let's move on to patching some of those. Here I look at the strength input with a few CV inputs. Check out my other two videos on elements for some more musical patches making use of the CVs, and also another video playing elements from a set of pressure points. If I just add an offset to the strength, you can hear how changing that offset changes the strength of the signal, which leads to higher velocity sounds and lower velocity sounds. Adding a sample and hold into the strength, we get varied velocities changing per note. Moving on to CV inputs, I'll look at modulating the mallet type on the strike section of the exciter, so that moves between the different mallet types. Here's the CV into the timbre. Turning up blow and changing the timbre for that with the CV as well. Here's changing the airflow on the blow section. Changing the airflow on the blow section is much more subtle, but this is massively affected by the resonator settings. Here's the bow, and that same LFO going into the timbre CV. Going back to strike, here's CV over the dampening on the resonator. You can hear that changing, how the energy dissipates through the vibrating surface. Here's the geometry control, and subtle movement works better on this. Larger CV ranges don't work quite as well as you're scanning through such a vast range of sounds. Here's changing the position with the CV, which is a little bit less obvious on the short notes, but turning up the dampening you can start to hear that introduce pulse width modulation style sounds. Here's CV over the brightness. And now into the space. So that's just a quick run through the strengthened CV inputs. Well, as I said, check out the other videos on my page for more musical applications of using CV with elements. So the last thing I'll look at is the external inputs. Going into the leftmost external input, which is red, this one goes through the exciter section first, so this will need triggering. This is affected by the contour envelope. Here's changing the pitch of the input, which is just a saw wave from a Tip Top Audio Z3000 oscillator. Going into the rightmost external in, which is green, this patches the sound straight through the resonator and skips the exciter altogether. Turning down the dampening, you can get rid of a lot of the overtones that are created by the resonator, but the positions will still control this PWM style sound. The brightness controls the overtones created by elements. Turning up the dampening, we get a stronger ringing of that resonator section. Here's the reverb from the space knob, and then I'll sweep the oscillator's pitch, which is coming into the external in. The tuning of elements also still affects the resonator, although I've still got a static pitch now at the input. Patching a slow triangle wave into the FM input, we can then sweep the pitch of elements resonators. I'll then add a slightly faster sine wave LFO into the geometry. Now moving that into the position, and I'll slow both LFOs down. Turning up the dampening, you can hear all this gorgeous modulation and overtones that we're creating on top of this saw wave. Here's sweeping the external input again. So Elements makes for a really interesting processor for external sounds. It can add modulation to static waves, add overtones and harmonics and resonances, create spatial stereo effects and reverb, and running other things like drums and vocals through the unit works great, but I'll possibly put this in a follow-up video as there's plenty to go at already in this overview. So that's it for the overview of Elements. You can check out some FM and more musical patches in my Elements patches video that's already on my page and linked in the description. And you can also see Elements played live from a pair of Make Noise pressure points. Again, that's on my page and linked in the description. As always, hit like and subscribe for more videos coming every week.